The night sky over the Nevada desert turned orange when the ship fell from the stars, and Sergeant Cole Bennett watched from his military truck as the burning object crashed into the sand 3 miles away, and his radio exploded with voices telling him to move fast. Cole and his squad of 12 soldiers drove toward the crash site with their weapons ready, and nobody knew what they would find, because nothing like this had ever happened before, and the government had been tracking the object for 6 hours as it fell through the atmosphere. When they arrived, the ship was not like anything Cole had ever seen, and it was shaped like a flower made of black metal with silver lines running across its surface, and smoke rose from the cracks in its hull, and strange sounds came from inside like someone singing a sad song. Cole ordered his team to surround the wreckage, and he approached the main opening with his rifle raised, and his heart was beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. And he thought about his sister Hannah back home, who always said he would be the first human to meet aliens. The door of the ship opened slowly, and Cole saw movement inside the shadows, and he shouted for whatever was inside to come out with hands raised, and for a long moment nothing happened, and then she appeared. She was tall and thin, with skin that looked like silver moonlight, and her ears were long and pointed like the elves from old stories, and her eyes were large and violet and filled with tears, and she was holding something against her chest, and trembling so hard Cole thought she might fall. The creature in her arms was small like a dog, but it had scales that flickered with dying orange light, and wings folded against its body, and a long tail wrapped around the girl, and it looked like a dragon from fairy tales, and Cole could not believe what he was seeing. The alien girl looked at Cole and made a sound that was not words but music, and it was the saddest thing he had ever heard, and she fell to her knees, still holding the wounded dragon, and Cole knew in that moment that she was not a threat, and she was afraid, and she was asking for help. Cole lowered his weapon and walked toward her slowly, and his soldiers shouted warnings, but he did not stop, and when he reached her, he knelt down and looked into her violet eyes, and she stopped trembling just a little, and the dragon in her arms opened one golden eye and looked at him. The military took them back to a secret base, and scientists came from everywhere to study the alien girl and her dragon, and they put her in a room with white walls and bright lights, and she screamed whenever anyone came near her, and the dragon would make the lights explode with strange energy. General Patricia Vance was in charge of the base, and she was a hard woman who had seen many wars. But even she did not know what to do with the alien girl, and the scientists could not understand her language, and she refused to eat, and she was getting weaker every day. Then something strange happened, and General Vance noticed that whenever Cole entered the building, the alien girl would stop screaming, and she would turn toward the door, like she could sense him coming. And one day Vance brought Cole into the room, and the girl looked at him and became calm. "She chose you," the general said, and Cole did not understand, but he accepted the assignment, and from that day he became responsible for the alien girl. And they gave her a name because they could not pronounce her real one, and they called her Lyra. Cole spent hours sitting with Lyra and talking to her even though she could not understand, and he brought her food and showed her pictures of Earth, and the dragon, which the scientists named Syndra, began to heal and grow stronger, and it would watch Cole with intelligent eyes. One night Lyra reached out and touched Cole on the side of his head, and suddenly he was somewhere else. And he saw through her eyes a beautiful world with crystal cities and purple forests and 2 moons in the sky. And he saw her people who looked like her with silver skin and pointed ears. Then he saw fire, and the crystal cities were burning, and something dark was coming from the sky, and it was not ships, and it was not creatures, and it was nothing and everything at the same time, and it swallowed the light and erased the people, and Lyra was running and screaming, and her dragon was just a baby. The vision ended, and Cole was back in the white room, and Lyra was holding his face with both hands, and tears were falling from her violet eyes, and she opened her mouth and spoke 3 words in broken English that she must have learned from listening to the soldiers. "They are coming." Cole felt cold fear run through his body, and he looked at Lyra, and he looked at Sindra, and he understood that this girl had not come to Earth by accident, and she had come because she was running from something terrible, and that something was following her. He stood up and walked to the door, and Lyra made a frightened sound, thinking he was leaving her, but Cole turned back and looked at her and said, "I am not going anywhere, and I am going to protect you, and whatever is coming will have to go through me first." And somewhere far away in the darkness between stars, something old and hungry felt the trail it had been following, and it turned its attention toward a small blue planet, and it began to move. 6 weeks passed, and Lyra learned English faster than anyone thought possible, and she would sit with Cole for hours, and he would point at things and say the words, and she would repeat them in her musical voice, and Sindra would watch them both with golden eyes that seemed to understand everything. The dragon was growing bigger now and stood as tall as a large dog, and its scales had changed from dull gray to deep red with streaks of gold. And sometimes when Sindra was sleeping, small flames would flicker from its nostrils, and the scientists were afraid of it. But Cole was not. Lyra began to speak in sentences and then in paragraphs, and she told Cole about her world, which was called Velkar, and her people who were called the Velkari, and they had lived among the stars for millions of years before humans even existed, and they had planted life on thousands of worlds. She told him about the gardens her mother kept and the songs her father sang, and the way the twin moons would rise over the crystal towers and paint everything in silver and blue, and Cole listened to every word, and he saw the pain in her eyes when she spoke of things she would never see again. Then she told him about the hollow, and her voice became quiet and afraid, and she said it was not a creature and not a machine and not anything that had a name, and it was emptiness that was hungry, and it moved through the universe eating everything, and it did not just kill, and it erased. When the hollow came to Velkar, the people tried to fight, but their weapons did nothing, and their ships were swallowed, and their cities vanished, like they had never existed. And Lyra ran with her baby dragon and found a ship and flew into the darkness, and she did not know if anyone else survived. Cole asked her why she came to Earth, and Lyra said she did not choose, and the ship chose. And it followed old maps that her ancestors had made long ago, and the maps led here, and she did not know why. But there was something else bothering Lyra, and Cole could see it in the way she flinched when he spoke too loud, and the way she apologized for everything, and the way she would not look him in the eyes. And one night he asked her what was wrong. Lyra was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "On my world, when a guardian was given to a refugee, it meant the refugee belonged to the guardian, and they had no voice and no choice, and they were property, and she had been afraid since the first day that Cole thought she was his to own." Cole felt something twist in his chest, and he knelt down in front of her so they were at the same level, and he took off the badge from his uniform and held it in his hand and said, "Where I come from. A soldier protects people who cannot protect themselves, and you are not my property, and you are under my protection, and that is different." Lyra looked at him, and her violet eyes were wide, and she said, "You do not want anything from me." And Cole said, "I want you to be safe, and I want you to be free, and I want you to stop being afraid, and that is all I want." Something changed in Lyra that night, and she smiled for the first time since Cole had known her, and Sindra made a sound that was almost like purring, and pressed its warm, scaled head against Cole, and he laughed and said, "I think your dragon likes me." That night, Cole was sleeping in his quarters when alarms started screaming, and he ran to the command center and found General Vance standing in front of screens that showed only static, and every satellite around Earth had gone dark at the same time, and nobody knew why. Then the screens came back on, and every screen on the planet showed the same image, and it was blackness deeper than space with a single point of light in the center that looked like an eye. And below the eye were numbers, and the numbers were coordinates, and the coordinates pointed exactly at the base where Lyra was hiding. Cole ran to Lyra and found her standing at her window looking up at the sky, and Sindra was beside her with flames flickering along its spine, and Lyra turned to Cole and her face was pale, and she said, "It found me, and it is coming, and I am sorry, and I am so sorry." Cole took her hand and said, "We are not giving you up," and Lyra said, "You do not understand what it is." And Cole said, "I do not care what it is, and it cannot have you, and that is final." And high above the earth, something vast and dark began to move closer, and the stars behind it disappeared one by one. The world learned about Lyra and Sindra within hours, because secrets cannot survive when every screen shows the same terrifying message, and people reacted in different ways, and some were angry and some were scared, and some wanted to fight and some wanted to surrender. Leaders from every country argued about what to do, and some said they should give Lyra to the Hollow to save themselves, and others said they should study her to find weapons, and others said they should hide her somewhere deeper and hope the Hollow would not find her. Lyra heard all of this through the news, and she made a decision, and in the middle of the night, she tried to leave the base, and she took Sindra and walked toward the desert, and she planned to fly away and draw the Hollow after her so Earth would be safe. Cole found her at the edge of the base, standing under the dark sky where stars were still disappearing, and he asked her where she was going, and she said away, and she said, "Your people are young and brave, but they do not know what is coming, and I cannot let them die for me." Cole was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Come with me," and he drove her in his truck to a place she had never seen, and it was a field of white stones stretching to the horizon, and each stone had a name, and Lyra asked what this place was. Cole said, "This is where we bury our soldiers, and these are people who died protecting others, and some of them died in wars they could not win, and some of them died for people they never met, and they did it anyway, because that is what humans do." Lyra walked among the stones and read the names and saw the dates, and some of the stones were very old and some were very new, and she felt the weight of all those lives given for strangers, and she did not understand how a species so young could have so much courage. Cole said, "We did not survive this long by giving up, and we did not build our world by surrendering the innocent, and you are not a burden, Lyra, and you are the reason we have something worth fighting for." That night, Sindra did something unexpected, and the dragon, which was now as tall as a horse, pressed its head against Cole, and suddenly Cole saw visions, and they were not memories from Lyra, but memories from Sindra, and memories that went back thousands of years. He saw the Velkhari in their glory, riding dragons into battle against enemies Cole could not name, and he saw warriors with silver skin and violet eyes fighting beside their bonded dragons, and he saw Lyra. But she was different, and she was wearing a crown made of starlight and leading armies. Cole pulled away from Sindra and looked at Lyra and said, "What are you?" And Lyra was quiet, and then she said, "I did not want you to know." And Cole said, "Tell me Lyra said she was not just a refugee, and she was the daughter of the last queen of Velkhar, and she was the heir to a throne that no longer existed, and Sindra was not just a dragon, but a war ember, which was a living weapon bonded to royal blood, and together they were the last hope of her people." She said the Velkhari had a prophecy from long ago that spoke of a final war against the darkness, and the prophecy named a species that would stand with them, and that species was called the Children of Dirt, and they lived on a small blue world, and they were stubborn and brave and refused to die. Cole said Children of Dirt, and Lyra said yes, and humans, and the ship brought me here because of the prophecy and because you were supposed to help us fight. Cole laughed, and it was not a happy laugh, but it was not a sad laugh either, and he said, "So we are the chosen ones," and Lyra said, "You are the last allies," and Cole said, "Well then, I guess we better start getting ready." Then the sky went dark and the moon vanished, and a voice that was not a voice vibrated through the mind of every human on earth, and it said, "Return what you have stolen, children of dirt, or be forgotten." And Cole looked at the empty sky and said, "No, for the first time in history, every nation on earth agreed on something, and they would not surrender Lyra, and they would not run, and they would fight, and it did not matter that they did not know how to win, because winning was not the point, and the point was refusing to kneel. Cole watched the news and saw leaders who had been enemies standing together, and soldiers from different countries training side by side, and scientists sharing secrets they had kept for decades. And he thought, this is what we could have been all along if we had something to fight for. His sister Hannah, who was a scientist, called him and said she was working on something using Lyra and asked if Lyra could help, and Cole brought Lyra to a secret lab where hundreds of scientists were trying to understand how to hurt something that was made of nothing. Lyra looked at their work, and she was amazed, and she said, "Your people have only been flying for 100 years, and you already understand things. My people took thousands of years to learn," and she began to teach them, and the scientists listened and built. They created shields that bent light around ships and weapons, that vibrated at frequencies that hurt the hollow, and most importantly, they built something called a memory anchor, which was a device that forced things to exist and prevented the hollow from erasing them. Syndra had grown enormous now and stood taller than a truck with wings that could block out the sun and flames that burned in colors that did not exist, and when the dragon flew over cities, people looked up with hope instead of fear, because they knew Syndra was on their side. The hollow attacked on a Tuesday morning, and it did not come with ships or soldiers, and it came with emptiness, and zones of nothing appeared around the world, and everything they touched vanished, and cities disappeared, and mountains were erased, and millions of people were gone in seconds. Humanity fought back with everything they had, and planes dropped bombs into the void, and tanks fired shells, and ships launched missiles, and none of it worked, and the zones of nothing kept growing, and more people disappeared, and it seemed like the end of everything. Then Lyra flew into battle on Syndra, and she was wearing armor that glowed with inner light, and she carried a weapon her ancestors had used, and she attacked the largest zone of nothing. And her dragon breathed fire into the emptiness, and for one moment the darkness screamed. Cole knew what he had to do, and he gathered 11 soldiers who volunteered, and they carried the memory anchor toward the heart of the largest void, and their mission was to plant it inside and wound the hollow from within, and everyone knew it was probably a one-way trip. Before Cole left, Lyra landed beside him, and she was crying, and she said, "I was afraid you would misunderstand me when we first met." And Cole said, "I know," and Lyra said, "But you never did, and you saw me when I could not see myself." And Cole said, "I see you now." Lyra pressed her forehead against his, which was a Velkari blessing, and she said, "Come back, Cole Bennett, and that is an order." And Cole smiled and said, "Yes, my queen," and then he was gone. Cole and his team drove into the void, and everything around them turned to darkness, and they could not see and they could not hear, and they felt themselves being pulled apart, but they kept moving and they planted the anchor, and Cole activated it. Light exploded through the darkness, and the hollow screamed a sound that shook the universe, and the void began to crack, and Cole grabbed his radio and said, "Tell her we made it, and tell her that." The radio went silent, and Lyra screamed his name, and Syndra roared, and the battle raged across the sky, and nobody knew if Cole was alive or dead, and the light kept spreading through the darkness like dawn breaking across an endless night. The hollow retreated, and for the first time in its eternal existence, something had hurt it. And the zones of nothing collapsed, and the darkness pulled back from Earth, and the stars returned to the sky one by one like candles being lit in a dark room. Search teams flew into the debris field where Cole and his team had been, and they found wreckage and bodies, and then they found Cole floating in the void, barely alive, and his body had aged decades in minutes, and his hair was white, and his face was lined, but his heart was still beating. They brought him back to Earth, and doctors said he would not survive, and his organs were failing, and his cells were dying, and Lyra pushed through the crowd and knelt beside him and placed her hands on his chest and closed her eyes. She used old Velkari techniques that were forbidden because they cost the healer years of their own life, and she poured her energy into Cole, and she felt herself growing weaker, but she did not stop, and Syndra stood over them both and added dragon fire to the healing, and together they pulled Cole back from death. Cole woke up 3 days later, and Lyra was sleeping in a chair beside his bed, and she looked tired and older somehow, and he reached out and touched her hand, and she opened her violet eyes and smiled and said, "You humans break every rule of the universe and somehow survive." Cole said, "I told you I would come back," and Lyra said, "You did," and Cole said, "Are we even now?" And Lyra laughed and said, "Not even close," and Cole laughed too, and it hurt, but he did not care. The world was different after the battle, and humans had proven themselves, and they had technology that would have taken centuries to develop, and ships that could fly between stars, and weapons that could hurt the darkness, and most importantly, they were not alone anymore. Refugees from a dozen species that the Hollow had scattered began arriving at Earth because word had spread across the galaxy that someone had fought back, and someone had survived, and that someone was the children of dirt on the small blue world that refused to be forgotten. Leaders from these species offered Lyra a chance to rebuild the Velkari throne and become queen of a new empire among the stars, and she considered it for a long time, and then she said no. She spoke to the gathered representatives and said, "My people seeded worlds and watched from above, and we thought we were gardeners, but we were just lonely gods, and humanity taught me something different, and you do not protect people by standing above them, and you protect them by standing with them." Years passed, and Cole grew old, and his hair stayed white, but his body healed, and he watched as Earth became the center of a new alliance, and ships from 100 worlds came and went, and humans walked on planets their grandparents could not have imagined. One day Cole stood on a hill overlooking a school where children from many species learned together, and Lyra stood beside him, and Syndra, who was ancient now, and wise, curled around them both, and the sun was setting and painting everything gold. A young soldier approached and asked Cole if he thought the Hollow would come back, and Cole watched Lyra teaching the children, and he watched the ships flying overhead, and he said probably, and the soldier asked if they would be ready, and Cole said yes. And far away in the darkness between galaxies, something old and hungry watched the little blue world and remembered the pain of being wounded, and for the first time in its endless existence, it hesitated, and it wondered if perhaps some things were not meant to be forgotten. The stars remembered, and humanity remembered, and Lyra remembered, and Cole remembered, and the universe was a little brighter than it had been before, and that was enough, and that was everything, and that was the beginning of something new.